Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we are going to get into unconventional wisdom. And maybe it's not all going to be completely unconventional, but we're going to impart some words of wisdom. So it's going to be a fun topic. We decided to deviate a little bit from, I guess, what we normally do in talking about mental health. But hopefully you guys will still get some good tips and you'll still have fun and it'll be a good episode. So I am going to go ahead and get us started. So
Okay.
my first bit of wisdom, and maybe this is a little unconventional, maybe a little random, but it is something I very firmly believe in. And some of mine have to do with relationships and some of them are just kind of, I guess, life wisdom, I guess. So
All of mine are relationship related, just so you know.
okay, that
Totally.
makes sense. So my first one is separate blankets.
Okay. Lindy has suggested that. I would like to know how. Do you and Curtis do that?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so tell me how it works, though. Don't you end up pulling one from the other, and don't they slide all over the place?
No, you just go to bed completely under separate blankets and it's phenomenal because you both sleep.
Well, okay, are they different weights?
Yes.
Like,
Well, okay.
like what's the reason they're different? Just so that you don't pull one off of the other, or
Yeah.
is one cooler than the other? Is one warmer? I'm wondering about this.
So couples who, and I want to know who these couples are that go to sleep and wake up in the exact same spot. I mean,
I don't know who does that. I think that's incredibly rare that happens, just because of the way we sleep. But
okay, right?
yeah,
Exactly. So, and the reason why Curtis and I sleep under different blankets is because we end up fighting over blankets the entire night. And I remember when I first got married, I had a friend who got married shortly after me, and she's like, yeah, we don't sleep under the same blanket. And I was like, oh, that's so sad. 10 years later, I don't know why we ever even tried to sleep under the same blanket. Seriously, guys, stop sharing blanket. I mean, you will sleep so much better. I will admit, though, and maybe this works well for us, is because I'm not a bed maker, and that I will get to a little bit later. But if you're a bed maker, then it can be a little more complicated. But the way we do it is if I do happen to make my bed, then because one of our blankets is smaller, and so the smaller one just goes on the bottom, and then like our big comforter, like our comforter set, goes over the blankets. But seriously, it was a game changer in marriage. I mean, we
oh,
don't fight over blankets anymore. I also like a weighted blanket, and Curtis doesn't. So
yeah.
that's another
Lindy
reason.
Lindy uses a weighted blanket. I can see the wisdom in that,
Yeah.
actually. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I
Yeah.
think that people ought to figure out how they can sleep better. To me, whatever it takes to
Mm-hmm.
sleep better, because as we've talked so many times,
Oh yeah.
sleep is fundamental. So good. I mean, that's a good piece of advice.
Yeah.
I'd do
Yeah.
that.
Separate blankets.
Separate blanket.
Seriously, guys.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Go ahead, Mark. What's your first one?
So my first one is, well, four of my five are on relationships. I think that I often hear people talk about wanting to be emotionally intimate with each other in
Okay.
marriage. But I think there's this misunderstanding of what that means. And to some people, it means that whatever enters my head, I'm going to be able to say to you, because that somehow is being emotionally intimate, is that I let you know all of my thoughts. So my first piece of unconventional wisdom is, I think good marriages, good relationships have a lot of self-censorship. And
Mm.
I think that you don't say whatever comes into your head. And I certainly do that. I mean, I think about things, in the process of conversation, or maybe Lindy and I are hanging out, and I don't say anything that comes into my head. I don't quite see the point, and that's not what emotional intimacy is. I think
No.
emotional intimacy is the ability to share your internal emotional state with the other person. It's not vomiting everything that comes into your mind out to the other person. I just talked with, I think it was an individual male, though we were talking about relationships, and I just happened to mention this, and it was like the light bulb went on. It's like, okay, yeah, right. I don't have to say everything that goes through my mind. I think It can be a really important thing for couples that it's okay to censor your thoughts.
Yes. And I think, too, part of being emotionally vulnerable is, yes, saying what you're thinking. And you can do that, or you can say it in a way that's not going to come across as maybe aggressive or defensive, because I like the idea of emotional intimacy. And I think that is just as important as physical intimacy in a relationship. And, sharing your thoughts and being open and being vulnerable is important. I guess it's a sign of emotional intelligence to
Mm-hmm.
be able to tell someone how you're feeling without attacking them.
Right. And so that goes into process, which is a
Yeah.
word I use with a lot of my couples. It's all about the process. And so
Mhm.
if there's something important that you need to say, then you need to say it, but then you shift modes to what's the best way to say this?
Yeah.
What are the best words that I can use? Or
Yeah.
what's the right context in which I can say this to my partner? And so I think it's more, you just don't blurt things out.
Yep.
Because once they get out, you can't take them back.
Mhm.
Can't
Yes.
unhear it.
Yes, words matter. And,
Hmm.
I think it's easy to forget that in a relationship because you are so close, you're so comfortable, and you naturally try to be forgiving, that it's easy to forget that once you say something, you can't unsay it and you can't
Right.
unhear something that's been said. Your spouse will always hear those words that hurt them.
Yeah.
So I
So,
had,
your
before we
turn.
move on, I had a good example of this. I shared it on the podcast. Oh, this was months ago. So Curtis and I were talking and, late at night, and he goes, lately I've just kind of really been in this funk. And my immediate thought was, yeah, I know.
Well, I hope it didn't come out that way.
No, no, it did not. I didn't say that. And,
I guess
and
it could have been worse. You could have gone, duh.
right. So,
Yeah,
but
it could have been worse.
But I didn't say it that way. I said, "Oh, yeah?" Like, and so I invited him to share more with me instead of just
Good.
saying, "Yeah, I know you've been in a funk lately. I can tell." And so again, it's emotional intelligence, and it's very much part of that emotional intimacy is
Right.
inviting rather than just saying, "Yeah, no clue,
Right.
stupid." Okay, so my next one is kind of along the same lines as my first one, and that is sleep in separate rooms when you need to. I
Hmm.
think that there's a stigma around married couples in particular not sharing a bedroom at night. I think we really need to let go of that stigma because I think there are absolutely times where it makes sense to sleep in separate rooms.
I agree. We're doing this right now, in fact, Lindy and
Yeah.
I, because of sickness and heat. So,
Right, and it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your relationship, and it doesn't mean that there's any sort of emotional disconnection, and it doesn't have to affect your intimacy at
no,
all, right?
no,
And I think that's probably what scares couples the most is it's like, well, if we stop sharing a bed at night, what's our intimacy going to look like? And so I think you just need to have an open conversation about that, but I think there are many reasons why it makes sense for couples to not sleep in the same room. When my youngest was born, he was a really, really poor sleeper, and it was affecting both of us. And I was a stay-at-home mom, and I could nap during the day, but Curtis had to work. And so what we would do, and he was working from home at the time, and so we slept in separate rooms. He would get a full good night's sleep. I would be up half the night with the baby, and then he would let me nap during the day. It worked very well, and it was a game plan. It wasn't forever. And the other thing too that I've heard of is with some couples, if you're working opposite schedules,
hmm.
then, it's okay to sleep in separate rooms.
Right. And so here's what I say to couples. And Lindy and as I mentioned, Lindy and I are doing this. I like to sleep at around 68 to 69, and
Mhm.
Lindsay's up to like 74.
Oh,
John and
wow.
she does that. And so in the wintertime, it's much easier. So I deal with it. Couples bring this in and they want to talk about it. What are the pros and cons of it? And so I think certainly the benefit is, as we said a minute ago, good sleep is fundamental.
Mhm.
But all that I suggest is that you then have to be more intentional about when you go to bed, like end the night together in some way,
Yes. Mhm.
as opposed to just, you end up going and getting ready and go to your separate. places, make it more of a ritual how you end the day and say good night. I mean, when you think about it, when you go to bed and you go to sleep, you're there, 7 to 8 hours. You certainly aren't interacting at all.
Mhm.
And so you aren't missing out on any interaction. And it's just
Yep.
how do you end the day is really what it's about. So I think that's a very good piece of advice.
Right. And I've heard this advice, go to bed at the same time. I've heard so many people tout that. I don't think that that's always realistic for every couple. Curtis and I have never gone to bed at the same time. I think what's more important is the way you end your day
Yeah.
together. Is that and every night before, and I'm usually the one that goes to bed first, almost always. And every night we come together and we do something together. And it's for us, it revolves around religion, but we have
Right.
this ritual that we do every night before I go to bed. And I think those are really, really important to do.
Yeah, Gottman talks about rituals, and
Hmm.
the rituals, he talks about it more in terms of how you leave during the day to go to work and how you come back. But I think the same thing applies as far as how you end your day.
Hmm.
It's really about how you do that. So I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't get hung up on always going to bed at the same time because it's not realistic, I feel like, for a lot of couples.
Right.
So just
Right.
end your day together. Okay. Your next
My
one.
turn?
Go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another one about relationships. And I think that, hey, I'll give you an example of one that's going on right now. And it's so Lindy and my youngest son is planning a marriage in about a year, a little over a
Hmm.
year. And so my future daughter-in-law, Caitlin, is really excited and planning this wedding. And so I am worried that Lindy gets too excited and she is giving advice where it hasn't been invited yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that can be problematic. Like in couples, if you're talking about things, I don't think you should go into the other person's process unless you're invited to.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is solving, I don't know that you should solve someone else's problems unless they say, what do you think I could do about this?
Yep.
Or in this case, if Caitlin says, well, could you help me find ideas about this and this and this? And then you're open to receiving any information. But if you haven't asked for that information, then it can feel like the other person is intruding, even in the
Mhm.
marriage. So, this is a characteristic that is, I'm going to make a global statement here that's almost always with men. We tend to raise men to be problem solvers. And
Mhm.
so their wives want to talk about something, whatever it is. And the husband, rather than listen and do the process that we've talked about validation and empathy,
Yep.
what they end up doing is saying, well, here's what you can do about this. And so they jump right into solution. And the wife hasn't asked them at all for solution. That's not where she's going. She just wants someone to listen to her.
Mhm.
And so the wisdom is don't enter into the other person's process until you're invited.
Yeah. And I certainly understand how hard it can be not to enter into that process, particularly if someone is going through something painful or something hard, because you want so much to fix it. You want to help them because this is someone that you care about and someone you're emotionally attached to. I have a friend right now who I've been talking a lot with because she's dealing with some struggles, and I want so bad to try to fix the problem.
Yeah.
But that's not what's needed. What's needed is for me just to listen. And so,
Right. But at some point, she may ask you, she may say, hey, Liz, what should I do?
yeah, she could. And, but until then, my role is just to listen and
Right.
just to, say, I'm here for you. And you can always talk to me about anything you need to. And, I also want to bring up this video and I'll post a link to it in the show notes because it's always worth watching. It's called It's Not About the Nail.
I love that one. I
Yes.
love that a lot.
Yes, it's a great video and it's about this exact same thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes someone just wants to vent. You don't need to fix the problem.
Uh,
All right. So, my next one is kind of just general life advice, and that is let go of, I guess, cultural expectations or general expectations. And so, this comes from my own personal experience. I hear all the time, productive people make their bed, and you should always start the day with making your bed. And
Right.
I finally just accepted I am not a bed maker. I do not make my bed every day. And for a long time, I felt guilty about it. And I finally just stopped, and I finally just accepted I'm not a bed maker, and I'm okay with that. I don't care. I will make my bed sometimes, like if someone's coming over and if we're going to be giving someone a tour of our house for like the first time, sure, I'll make my bed, right? But beyond that, I don't care. Neither does Curtis. Neither of us cares if the bed is made. So we don't make the bed. And you know what? It was really freeing to just accept that and let it go and not care that my bed doesn't get made every day.
So Lindy's staying in our main bedroom and her bed is made. I'm staying
Uh-huh.
downstairs and my bed is not made. I can give you some insight as to where that came from, though.
Okay, yeah.
It's really more specific than just productive people make their bed every day. It really comes from this idea that people who are having trouble getting structure and being productive throughout the day,
Okay.
then if they start it out with something that's very structured, it tends to help them.
Okay.
So if you're productive anyway, and I'm sure you get up and you make breakfast for the kids. The kids are up,
Mhm. Yep.
during the school year. Are your kids back in school yet?
Yeah, they are. Oh
So,
yeah.
you're getting them off to school. I mean, there's no way you're not going to be productive. And so making the bed is not really an important structural component to you being productive. But for some people, it helps to start that, to set that expectation. I'm going to do this.
Okay.
That's
And
where it comes from.
And I get that. And that makes a lot of sense. And I know people, in fact, my best friend, she said, I told her about this. I explained to her how freeing this was. She's like, yeah, no, I have to make my bed. She's like, it's such a simple thing. And it genuinely bugs me to walk into my adult space and it not be neat. And so for some people, it's very important. And I know that some people are very avid bed makers. They make their bed every single day, which is great. And I'm glad for them. But I'm not a bed maker and I'm okay with it.
Yeah, if I'm not going to see my bed during the day, which I don't, where
Uh-huh.
I'm sleeping, I don't see the point.
Yeah,
Because I don't
exactly.
see the point. So I agree
Yeah.
with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What do you got for us?
So again, with relationships, and this is a problem that I would guess maybe every relationship, every marriage might have, and that is don't say negative things about the other person's family.
Okay.
Even if there's this, even if they themselves are saying negative things
Okay.
about their own family, that is not an invitation for you to jump in and say negative things as well. It's a mistake that a lot of people make. Again, it probably ties back into that other the one I said previously about don't enter into the other person's process unless
Mm.
invited. Because if your partner is saying something negative about their own family of origin,
Mhm.
your job is to listen. It's not to
Mhm.
pile on and say, yeah, you're right. I can't believe, your dad did this or your mom did that. So even if the other person has negative feelings about their family of origin, it will hurt. Typically, it will hurt if they hear you say something negative about
Mm.
their family. So I
Okay.
think it's really an important thing. Just don't say it unless you're invited to give your opinion, which
Mhm.
probably that rarely happens, I think, when we're talking about families of origin. So it's a very tender subject for most people, especially if
Yeah.
you come from, what you might call dysfunctional families of origin, then it can be very, very tough because often those dysfunctional families of origin continue to be dysfunctional even as you're an adult and move away and start your own family.
Right.
And so, there's always something that you can talk about each of your families of origin, but just talk about your own. Don't talk about the other.
Well, because you have to remember that no matter what your spouse might be saying about their family of origin, they still love them. There's still an attachment
Yes.
there.
See, that's the piece
Yeah.
that they still love them. They're still attached. They're still mom and dad, and they're still the
Mhm.
siblings. And yes, they can say something, but if you say something, it's very different, has a different feeling to it.
Mhm. Yeah, it does. So my fourth piece kind of goes along with yours, I guess. I was going to do this one last, but it fits in so well with yours that I'm going to do this one next. And that is never say anything negative about your spouse to your family of origin.
Yep, I agree with that.
Yeah. So, and this was advice that I got just before I got married. And let me tell you, it's been key. And so when this piece of advice was explained to me, the way he said is you want your parents to think you have the best husband in the world, right? And then he said to Curtis, you want your parents to think you have the best wife in the world. And he said the reasoning is because oftentimes maybe you guys you're fighting or you're in the heat of the moment and your mom calls. It's really easy to just vent and say, oh, he did this and I'm so mad about it. Well, you guys are going to work it out between yourselves and you're going to forget about it and move on, but your family isn't. Your parents might not, and they're just going to be thinking, you did what to my child? Right? And so,
Mhm.
and it's the same thing with siblings. Our families of origin, they don't just go away because you're married, which is a good thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's very important to maintain familial relationships. And so just because you're married, your allegiances have changed, but your family's hasn't. And so be very careful about what you say about your spouse to your family because they're more likely to hold a grudge than you are.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then as your children get older, it's important to do the same thing, like we have older
Yes.
children, is you don't say negative things about their mother or
Mhm.
their father to them. You just don't do it. You keep it within the couple.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I agree. Okay. What
So,
is
so
yours?
this is more of a personal one. I think it makes relationships healthier.
Okay.
And so I think everyone ought to have, I'll call it a hobby
Okay.
or some sort of other interest other than just depending on their partner. And
Ah.
sometimes I will see this in couples where they come in and they aren't giving, like, one maybe doesn't have a hobby or any outside interest and it feels smothering to the other
Mhm.
person because they always want to be there. They always want, maybe a little enmeshed, although it doesn't have to be that way. It's just if your partner is your only outlet for, interesting conversation or things like that, or going and doing things together, then that can be a problem long term. The way I describe it to couples is, you're two individuals, so you have the two eyes, and you come together and you form this we.
Mhm.
But if the eyes get sucked into the we so that there's no differentiation with the eyes, then that's a problem. So you're still individuals and
Mhm.
you create the new entity of the we and they overlap. But I think that where I've seen difficulties in relationships is when there are no other outside interests or friends or things like that. Now, hopefully it's not an expensive or time consuming,
Right.
just because I will say this, I certainly have a lot of spouses who are unhappy with the spouse who golfs every Saturday, just because that
Mhm.
is a incredibly time-consuming sport. But
Yes.
but again, it's their interest, and so I think there are many things that you can do. So I think having outside interest is really important, something you do on your own.
Yeah, I agree. And so I want to add to that a little bit. And this isn't my last piece, but I kind of want to add to it. And that is, I guess, owning your expectations when your spouse does have an interest outside of you. So Curtis and I ran into this a lot in the first few months of our marriage. He is a gamer, and I knew he
Mhm.
was a gamer before we got married, and I committed to loving and accepting him for who he is. And I would get so mad at him because he would spend his free time gaming because he wasn't spending it with me,
Yeah.
which which
Well, there has to be balance, right? There's got
right,
to be balance.
right, and he was very willing to do something with me, but really, it took me a while to figure out I wasn't mad that he was gaming, I was mad that he didn't want to spend time with me. That's really what my frustration was about, and so, it didn't take us long to figure out that I just have to say something to him. I say, "Hey, I wanted to do something together." And he immediately will say, "Yeah, sure, let's do something." And he'll wrap up what he's doing and get off his game and spend time with me. And so I think when your spouse does develop a hobby, or I guess kind of the opposite thing where maybe your spouse is too involved in something, I think you need to just come up with a system or I guess a game plan for it,
Right.
right?
Well, you need to
So,
have a good dialogue about it.
yeah. Okay. All right. So, my last piece of unconventional wisdom is not so unconventional. I think it's just good wisdom. And that is learn to be in the moment. And
Mm.
I really remind myself of this a lot as a young mother because it's so easy to look ahead and think about all the things that I'm going to get to do when my kids are more independent. And so I really try to remind myself to enjoy the moments that I have with them now,
Hmm.
especially as my youngest is 3 and I'm starting to think, oh, he's going to be going to kindergarten in a few years and everything I'm going to be able to do. I have to remind myself to enjoy what I have now. Enjoy him being little and attached and more dependent on me because I'm not always going to have that. And so I think no matter what stage you are in life, you need to just learn to find the joy in it, right? You need to stop looking ahead and just be in the moment.
Right. And, you're fighting looking ahead, but I see a lot of people who live in the past
Mm,
and they're stuck in the past as opposed to being in the moment. And it's often the what ifs. What if I would have done this? What if I would have done that? How would my
mhm.
life be different if I would have made this other choice? Which is totally unhelpful.
Yeah.
But some people get stuck on that and they miss the moment. They miss what's going on right now in their life. And often they miss the good things, the positive things, which I think is what you're talking about, is that there are a lot of positives that are going on that you want to, be able to experience fully. And if you're either in the past or if you're in the future, that makes it hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's okay to be excited about upcoming things. I mean, I'm very excited for my kids to grow and to see how they're going to develop. That is something I look forward to, but I also cherish the times when they were babies, when they were newborns and I was providing all of their food, when I was nursing them and all of those moments. I cherish those. And it's okay to do that. It's okay to look back with fondness on memories. It's okay to look ahead in excitement for the future. I think that's very, very human. But don't forget the moment that you're in because you don't ever get to redo a moment.
Right. Right. I agree with that. So my
Okay.
last one, my last one might be a silly one, and
Okay.
it is food related.
Okay.
But I learned this thing. I'm here. I'm 67. I learned this thing maybe just a few years ago, and I thought everybody ought to know this. And it is that if you add a little bit of salt to chocolate, it really enhances the flavor. Have you ever
Okay.
done that?
Uh-uh.
Okay, so if you have hot chocolate,
Okay.
and you have to not put a lot in, it's just a
Right.
very little bit of it. And there's something about the salt that enhances the flavor. So you can buy chocolate bars now in the store, and usually it's, like some chocolate with sea salt is what they'll say.
Okay.
And that's all they're doing is they're putting the salt in, and there's something about that salty taste
Mm-hmm.
with the chocolate that really makes it chocolatier. And so I thought I would share that with people. If you don't know it, it really is a
Mm.
great thing to know how to enhance your love of chocolate. Well, I love chocolate, so
Uh-huh.
it's one of those things that I do often. But don't add a lot. This is not a
Yeah.
lot of salt,
Yeah.
or it's not going to taste very good. It's really a little salt, and you experiment with it a little bit to see what it tastes like. But it really is enhancing the chocolate. That's
That
my that's my silly last unconventional wisdom piece.
Well, I love it, and, I'm gonna have to try that. Now I'm
Try
gonna have
it.
to make hot chocolate and add a
Yes.
little bit of salt, and I would imagine it's the right kind of salt because I'm thinking of, like do you ever use, like, Himalayan sea salt, like the pink salt?
Those are big, that's big chunky stuff. I don't know that
Yeah,
that would do it very well. I'd go with the regular table salt.
yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking of, common drinks where it's like sea salt and caramel or something like that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that sweet and salty, it's like chocolate dipped pretzels. It's
Hmm.
it's amazing. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
and that's what they're doing is they're combining those two tastes.
Which is a great euphemism for life. Salt is the savor
Yeah.
of the earth, right? I mean,
Right.
salt just makes everything better, but moderation is important
Moderation in
because
all things. Okay.
yes, moderate because we all know that too much salt is definitely not good for you, but you need a little salt in your life.
That's right.
Well, you do need salt in your life. It's also an important part of your nutrition is salt.
Well,
Like you have to have salt.
to have the iodine that
Yes,
often has iodine in it. That's the problem with the Himalayan sea salt. It doesn't have the iodine in it.
right. Someone once said that if someone has high blood pressure, Himalayan sea salt is good for it. It helps lower it. And I thought, I wonder if it's just that they're getting less iodine or it's probably because they're using less salt in general. I don't know if it's actually
It's
the
it's not the iodine that raises your blood pressure. It's actually
Oh,
salt.
Oh,
It
okay.
has something with the amount of water in your body is what it
Mm,
is. And so, yeah, you do have to be careful about it. But I use salt every morning on my eggs just to get the iodine because I wasn't getting enough iodine just using.
mm.
And iodine is really important for your, what's it? It's the thing that has to do with your metabolism, thyroid.
Okay.
So
Mm.
iodine is really important for thyroid function. That
Oh,
and
interesting.
what we call selenium. So selenium is one of those things you can get from some nuts, like filberts have selenium, and so the two together. So
Okay.
there's your health tip for the day. Iodine is important for thyroid function.
Which is good to know because a lot of people struggle with thyroid
Yeah,
issues, and your thyroid can affect all sorts of things.
right.
I mean, thyroid issues have been linked to depression
Oh yeah,
and, all tied in, weight and sleep, it's all linked to
yep,
your thyroid or the endocrine system, as it were.
it is.
Okay, so this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we did this. I hope you guys enjoyed it and you enjoyed some of our unconventional wisdom. Some of it was just good advice. So, next week, we are going to get into single men dating, which sounds a little redundant, but we're going to talk about how her heterosexual men have less dating opportunities and why. And it's going to kind of tie back into what we talked about last week, feminism and masculinity. We ran short on time and we didn't get to talk about toxic masculinity. And so we're going to kind of combine those two and really talk about some of the cultural expectations that surround men in today's day and age.
Right, and it's based off an article from Psychology Today. Maybe we could put that link in the
Hmm.
program notes, and
Yes.
then people could read that article if they want.
Okay. Yep. That will be in there. All
Okay.
right. We'll see y'all next week. Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.